Would you like to discover powerful ways to drive change in your organization? Would you like to learn about the latest concepts in people strategy, HR effectiveness, and optimization that will help your organization achieve a competitive advantage in your industry? Then HRBP MBA Masterclass with Ron Thomas is for you. With today's uncertain business landscape, HR leaders now play a pivotal role in what some say is a paradigm shift in the industry. This comprehensive 3-day program, in person or virtual, will empower you to embrace a more strategic mindset, enhance your decision-making skills, and help your organization to the next level. To register as a group or individual, email us at info@strategyfocusgroup.com or visit our website at www.strategyfocusgroup.com.
Good morning, good evening, depending upon what part of the world you're in. If it's Friday, it is the CEO series where we bring together the most interesting people, global leaders, innovators, disruptors, entrepreneurs, and authors, which we have today. My good friend Jay Kuhns, who's a human resource executive, leadership coach, speaker, consultant. He's the author of Unstoppable Power. Leverage energy, risk, and relationship and advance your career. Can't wait to get into that. Jay's progressive leadership approach has projected him to executive positions with Johns Hopkins, HCA, and several consulting firms over a number of years. His leadership blog, No Excuses HR, which he has written for over a decade, has consistently been recognized for his high focus on accountability and leadership. And with that, I will introduce to you Jay Coons, my good friend. How are you, Jay?
Ron, I'm doing super. Thanks so much for having me on the show. I'm really
I'm glad to have you here. You know, I when I read through people's careers and I see that where we are at this particular point, I'm always interested as to how Jay got from Jay starting out to Jay where you are today. So kind of give us a highlight of that.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey. I started out early in life and going through grad school thinking I was going to focus on being the executive director of a human service agency. I had a position in my 20s. I was going to grad school. I got my master's degree in social work, which was a very versatile human service agency leadership degree. And I was moving along at an agency of about 50 people. And I realized, gosh, this seemed big when I started here, and now it seems really small. And I started thinking, not in a bad way, just I felt like I think I can do more. And so I took advantage of an opportunity to work in a hospital, which healthcare has been a passion of mine for years and years and years. And I became the manager of training and development with exactly zero experience as the manager of training and development, but I brought a tremendous amount of energy and enthusiasm to the interview process.
Yeah.
And which ultimately became an element of my story. And shortly thereafter, the leaders started coming to me with their employee relations issues, not the HR leader, which was a little awkward, but I was brand new in this space, and suddenly the HR leadership turned over and I was promoted into HR director. And I consider myself particularly, well, I guess all the way through, to be very opportunistic. If there's something out there, I've gone for it. The risk is none. If you don't get it, you're still in the same spot you were to begin with. So what's the downside? Yeah. So I was able to parlay those early, very fortuitous opportunities into advancing my career fairly rapidly. And I moved, that was all in upstate New York. And I had an opportunity to join HCA, a giant healthcare company here in the States, in Tampa Bay area, where I've been for the last 20 plus years. But I took advantage of HCA opportunities. I moved into the VP of HR role for one of the Johns Hopkins specialty hospitals based in Florida. Okay. And had some opportunities to do some international consulting with their group over in Malta with a big hospital over there. Very exciting, very interesting. and was a client of my current firm twice. And we really connected over the last 20 years. I left hospital life after 20 years and led the national healthcare practice for a recruitment process outsourcing firm and HR strategy shop. And we grew our healthcare revenue to about 70% of the firm, which was really exciting to have that kind of growth. And then about 3.5 years ago, I got a phone call from the former founder and owner of IRI Consultants, where I work now. And he said, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm in Orlando about to board a flight on a mission trip to Kenya for 2 weeks." And he said, "Well, of course you are. When you get back, call me." And so when I got back, we started talking, and I've been leading our strategic planning efforts for the last 3.5 years at IRI. We're an employee and labor relations consultancy here in the States, and experiencing tremendous success and growth. And it's just been wild and fun and, high speed every second. I love it.
Yeah. Well, you know what? A couple of things that popped up when you talked about that. Opportunistic, looking for opportunities and not shying away, because some people would have said, "No, I'm comfortable as to where I am and I'm going to stay here."
Mm-hmm.
So when you think of that and you think of the phone call you receive, and that really kind of connected with me, because I'm here in Dubai because of a phone call. Someone called me and said, "Hey, I saw something. Would you want to discuss?" How could you develop that mindset? And we'll get to that, I'm sure, when we get into the book. For people, we talked before we started about the layoffs and people's careers being impacted.
Mm-hmm.
Opportunistic.
Well, I think that for me, as you know, I'm not 24 anymore. I know I look it, Ron. I know I look it. It's the surgery.
Welcome to the club.
Just in case anyone's confused, I'm not 24 anymore. And as I've looked back retrospectively, I was so hungry to move ahead. I would take any risk. I would take any assignment. I volunteered for every single thing that I could, because I wanted to, no one's indispensable, but I wanted to be viewed as a rising leader who was willing to do whatever it took. I'll do my job and I'll take 3 system-wide, company-wide project teams on. I'll do whatever, because not only was it demonstrating my commitment, and my loyalty is a weird word, but how enthusiastic I was about supporting the firm, but it also helped me learn. So when I took that manager of training and development job in my 20s, a couple years later, I got promoted to the largest member of our health system. Well, about 2 years after that, I went back to the small hospital that I started. Everyone thought I was nuts. I went back because my former boss, who was an executive, left. And I called the CEO and I said, his name's Frank. And I said, "Frank, it's Jay." And he was a no BS guy. Yeah. So I just said, he says, "Hi, Jay." I said, "Frank, I heard Joanne left. I want her job now." Ooh. I just said it.
Yeah.
And he said, "Are you serious? You want to come back?" I said, "Yes." So I came back, we talked, and I got the job. But I strategically and intentionally saw that as an opportunity to be a big fish in a small pond. Because while the balance sheet's going to have fewer zeros, the responsibilities are exactly the same.
Yeah.
And so that helped reframe the trajectory of my career, because once you're an executive, whether you have 1,000 employees or 10,000 employees, you're still an executive. Now you have to deliver, of course. You have to be articulate and savvy and knowledgeable and all those things, but you don't even have a fighting chance for 10,000 if you don't go for it at 1,000. And so that, for me, as people think about layoffs, and it's just sickening to hear. We hear these numbers, 10,000, 20,000. That's 20,000 families that are massively disrupted, right? It's not just numbers. And so for me, can't be indispensable, but doing everything you possibly can to learn and grow and be able to pivot and do other things is really, really important. If you think about the CEO of a health system, do they need to know how every job is done? Do they need to be able to do every job? No, that's impossible. They don't do surgery. They're being asked to be a different type of leader. They need a savvy skill set. They need to be articulate. They need to be able to have a vision and execute on that vision and bring people together. They don't need to know how to run the autoclave. They need to know the autoclave is important, but they don't need to run it. And so that's where that opportunistic learning for me really helped accelerate my career.
Wow, that's so huge, because when you think about the phone call that you made to that CEO, the confidence level that you built up over a period of time to say, hey, I want that job, that's a huge step.
And I didn't know if he was going to laugh or say, come on up, right? Or slam the phone down like you're crazy.
Yeah.
But I'm absolutely blessed. It worked out beautifully, and it opened doors for me that I would have had to wait years and years.
So let's take a turn from that and think about the book that was just released. I'm still waiting on my copy. I left New Jersey, I think Tuesday.
Yeah, it's coming. I've been on the road for 2 weeks. I promise it's coming.
I'm still waiting for my copy. But so that all of those learnings were kind of built into and repackaged all your thoughts into Unstoppable Power. Is that kind of a short version?
It is. The desire to put my leadership thoughts in one place has been growing literally for 13 years. I started my blog in 2010, and I thought, well, I'll read it and my mom will read it. So there's two people who will read what I have to say about leadership. Yeah. But it became an absolute passion. And so I'm approaching 1,000 blog posts now. Wow. It's just been a huge amount of content, and it was a great release for me, because when you're in an executive role, you have a tremendous amount of influence, you have a tremendous amount of authority, but you're not always, with your direct reports and in high profile situations, you're able to speak about things, but you can't really elaborate. There's usually not a lot of time unless there's something really special where you're giving a formal update. The blog was a way to channel in very consumable short posts thoughts about leadership and trying to inspire leaders to be better. I have this incredible bias that 95% of all problems in organizations are because of leadership, which means 95% of all problems can be resolved with effective leadership, right? Exactly. Very unscientific, but no one's been able to say I'm crazy yet, so I'm going to stick with it.
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
All I was going to say was that every piece of research that I read says the same thing.
Yeah. It's just we empower workforces, but not really. We empower them to do what we tell them to do. That's not really empowerment. So, and that's okay. That's how the world works, and that's okay. But to answer your question, so I had this journey of writing about leadership, and the tagline on my blog is holding ourselves accountable, meaning leaders, holding ourselves as leaders accountable. And so when I started on the book last year, I did a lot of introspection around what is it that I believe about leadership. Like, if I'm asked, what are the core elements around leadership that matter the most? And what have I seen that's been so effective? It really boils down to three things. High energy every day. Doesn't matter if you feel great or feel crappy. Got to bring energy every day. Yeah. Number two, you have to take risks. And I don't mean reckless decisions, but you and I both have seen so many leaders who, the farther up the chain they go, they play it safer and safer and safer, and they shrink and their credibility disappears. Yeah. Whereas we're getting paid as leaders to make decisions, to take risks. When I started pushing social media really hard, I was teased by my colleagues. Jay, are you Twittering again? Twittering isn't even a word. That's not even a thing, right? So, but I just stayed the course. Like, this is 13 years ago. This is where the world is going. We are going to be there as an organization. And all that teasing stopped when some of the areas where we had the highest number of vacancies for the most skilled positions suddenly had waiting lists for people who wanted to be part of our organization because our employer brand strategy worked. And so that whole concept of taking the risk is really, really important. So energy, risk, and the last piece that, as I reflected on all these years, was absolutely valuing the power of the relationships that I could have personally with the CEO, the heart surgeon, the director, and the housekeeper who comes through. And after I've been busy all day, they're emptying my trash, they're vacuuming my office, and I would thank them and, call them by name. These sound like simple things that everybody knows, but executing on these things is very different than saying, oh yeah, I know about that.
Yeah.
It's the practice of energy, risk, and relationships for me that will unleash this unstoppable power that leaders have. And I want them to feel that they can actually do it and believe in themselves to do it and understand it might be lonely sometimes, but it will be worth it. It will be worth it.
When you talked about the lady that comes in, the person that comes in to clean or whatever it was, I remember reading an article about the CEO of one of the large investment firms and how he failed an exam because the professor, their final exam was, I've taught you everything that you could learn possibly about leadership, but the final exam is going to be based on who is the person that comes and cleans up from us every afternoon once the class is over. And her name was Dottie. And if you were to, I think it was Fidelity or one of those people, one of those companies, but it was the same concept. So we think of the org levels inside of an organization. Memory is always good for here, but the further we go down, we tend to,
it gets fuzzy.
It gets fuzzy, memory lapse as a result of that. So, and her name was Dottie. And he said, so many people in that room failed that exam. And he says, I've taken that as a learning lesson. Wow, that was a great, powerful story that you told as it relates to that. So all of this kind of built up and said, you know what? I've got to get it out there. And this is where the book came about.
Yeah, it is. And I had started my notes. I'm a very, I try to be somewhat of a contemporary worker as myself. So no pens, no paper. So I've got my iPad, I've got my iPhone, I've got my MacBook. That's it. That's three things on my desk. Yeah. And so I was looking through my iPad notes about the book idea because I got to Midsummer. I had spoken with a couple of very close friends, personal board of directors type folks. That's been an important element of my leadership journey. I talk about that in the book. And so I said, okay, this is it. I'm literally going to do it. So I opened up my notes. January of 2017, I had a note, this is the year. And I got to it in August of 2022. So it just shows you there's excuses, there's noise. I'm blessed to work for an amazing consultancy, and we are absolutely going 100 miles an hour, which is a thrill. But how does one carve out these other things? And you can probably guess that what was sacrificed was sleep over the last 8 months to get the book done. And it's been this culmination of key drivers for me, important elements for me that made a difference. And it's really not intended to be something that's preachy. It's intended to be conversational, particularly, Ron, with new and emerging leaders and mid-career leaders. Because I've done so much coaching over the years with all levels of leadership in my organization, CEO on down. They trust me. I'm thankful that I've been able to build those relationships where they trust me. We work on issues, we tackle issues. But when I think about coaching, a lot of times executive coaching can be a punishment. Jane Smith is failing as the COO. We need to get Jane a coach so she can be fixed.
Yeah, fixed.
And we're not going to fix Jane, right?
Yeah.
If Jane's motivated, now we can really do some great things with Jane. But I haven't seen where there's this desire to connect with emerging leaders or leaders who are in their 30s or 40s and say, I want to take it to the next level, and I'm smart, I know all the things, but so much of, as you know, the higher up you go, it's relationship, it's executive presence, it's savvy, it's connection, it's being able to inspire. And I don't mean that in a cheesy way, like a meme on Instagram. I mean, just like, wow, this woman, this man, like, I want to work for them. Like, I want to be on their team. That's where I want this kind of energy to go. And I get super excited about it, as you can tell. But I just think it's so important, because the 20 and 30 somethings of today are going to be the C-suite soon. And what's their world going to be? They're now evolving in a world where it's all about disruption. When I was cutting my teeth, disruptors were not a good fit.
That's right. You were
and
out.
They got fired. Pretty soon, if those of us who are maybe a little bit more senior aren't into disruption, we're going to be the bad fit.
That's right. That was such a great story. You mentioned personal board of directors.
Yeah.
You mentioned building relationships. The work is the work, but navigation, leadership plus 1 plus 2 is important. And those are the kind of topics I'm sure you get a little more in depth in your book. I can't wait to get I was hoping I got the book before I got on the flight.
Yeah, sorry.
It's okay. It's okay. We're still cool.
It's coming. Thank you. Yeah, personal board of directors, it's an idea that I first heard about from a good friend and colleague, Charlie Judy, in Chicago, when he had written about it. And I thought, that's a really interesting concept. And it's not a new concept, but it was new to me at the time. And every year I evaluate who should be on my personal board of directors. And I have a couple of rules. One is you can't work at my company, because it's too easy to default into, you know how Jane is, you know how Bill is, you know how Jay is. I don't want that. I need somebody close enough to me, but not that close, because they're not going to be as objective as I need them to be. And so, and I have people all over the place. And when I've had to make really giant decisions, I tap into them, but they don't know they're on my personal board of directors.
Yeah.
Because that's like a pressure thing.
Yeah.
I just reach out to them as a friend and colleague, but I have my short list that I know, what I'm doing. So I talk about that. And it's been really important, particularly when I left my hospital CHRO life and moved into consulting, because I had 20 years in the rearview mirror as a hospital exec, loved that environment, was pretty good at what I was doing. And I figured, I've got 20 years ahead. Well, all of a sudden this gigantic pivot came, and I needed to do some deep dive conversations with that group. And it was very helpful.
I love that concept of the board of directors, because I do a lot of human resource development across the world. And I always tell aspiring HR leaders that you have to learn how to navigate plus 1 plus 2. Who do you know? If you did an audit, who do you know? Who you're cool with, who you're not cool with? How can I become more connected to these particular people? And based on what you're saying, it's the same kind of concept, but that's more of an internal piece. But I love what you talked about was the external approach of that, the people that are not working into your organization and tapping into that level of knowledge.
Yeah. And I try to be very intentional about the folks who have a pretty broad view. They have enough experience where they've worked in larger organizations. They understand the complexities and the political reality, not necessarily bad politics, but there's just politics.
Yeah.
And understanding that journey you have to go on, because then I was able to leverage that. Just to touch on internally for a second, I used to schedule meetings with all of my executive peers once a month. We had a standing meeting, and I kept it whether we had issues to talk about or not. Because if we got through the business portion in, say, 30 or 40 minutes, I didn't say, thanks, see you at the next meeting we're all in.
Yeah.
I would stay and say, how's the house? How was your trip? How's your dog? How's your kid? And this sounds like it's not all that important. It's immensely important, because when the you know what hits the fan in the workplace, but you and I know all about each other's families, trips, hobbies, adventures, we're not going to be as inclined to attack each other now, because our relationship is deeper than just this facade we tend to put up in the corporate world. It's deeper now. So now the issue can be put on the table and we can partner and attack it, versus, oh, it's your fault, Ron, or it's my fault, Jay. No. We have a thing we got to figure out, and it's driving us both crazy. Let's put it in the middle of the table and let's attack it.
Wow. You know what? I can't wait to get this book, because as you were walking through that, of having the personal relationship, and Bill Campbell, who there's a book out, Bill Campbell, CEO coach, who's probably one of the premier executive coaches across the globe. He's dead now, but he says the exact same thing. Starting a meeting, you discuss how was the weekend, all these small things, but you get to know. I get to know Jay, and I know Jay is going through a transformation, moving into a new area, into a new town, and he's trying to get on track. And I understand the full 360 of each individual in the room, and that's exactly what you were. I can't wait to get this book, man.
Yeah. It really helped me, particularly with some execs. You don't love and get along perfectly with every single person you work with, right? That's just the reality. Yeah. So I found that to be particularly helpful with folks that maybe we wouldn't have been automatic pals outside of work. Where some people you just connect with, you're like, hey, let's go to dinner on Friday, and it's great, right? It's just natural. Everything's cool. Yeah, everything's cool. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So leadership development. When I did a search a few weeks back for a project, and the amount of spend from the corporate side on leadership development programs, and then when you look at engagement scores throughout, there's continually kind of flatlining, falling, or whatever it is. There's not a big ROI on leadership development, in the full context of the amount of spend. So what are your thoughts on that? Because I'm sure once your book gets out, you're going to be speaking all over the globe. You're going to be counseling senior leaders up the chart. What is your message to them?
Well, it's a real conundrum, particularly for those folks in the leadership development space, because you're trying, you have a good product and you think it's really going to be applicable and yield the results that you want. That's a small element of what we do in my current company, and we have become obsessed with demonstrating a change in behavior afterwards. Wow. So that's where that analytics piece, post-training, not just did you enjoy the training? Yeah. Because half the time people are kind and they just give you great scores, right?
Yeah. Smiley faces.
Yeah. So that level of accountability around, are we able to demonstrate that Jay, the middle manager who went through the training, is literally behaving differently now, and we can prove it, right? This is not a new concept, by the way, but it's hard to execute on. So having the ability to execute on the value is great. I also have come to in a little bit of a snarky tone, so I hope it doesn't come across as too flip.
That's okay. We'll be friends.
Yeah, that's true. I have started to embrace, again, not a new word, but this concept of upskilling leaders. Leaders have skills, but what do we really need them to be able to do? And for me, it's two things. They need the competence to deliver the messages we need them to deliver, engaging with employees, articulating strategy, whatever. And they need the confidence to deliver those messages. Because absent those two things, we can't train people. I'm not a big fan of the word training. We kind of train our dog, we train our pets, right? But that people don't get trained. And I know if it's a technical skill, yes, it's training. I'm not trying to open a giant can of worms here. But when we're talking about who are the savviest leaders we know? Like if I asked you, Ron, list the 5 top savviest leaders you've ever met. Savvy is a pretty high bar.
Yeah.
It's a really high bar.
Yeah.
And I'm obsessed with the savviest leaders do the most progressive things and engage their people in ways that the traditional folks just don't do.
Yeah.
And getting to savvy is around skills and competence and confidence and demonstrating that material change in behavior.
I smile when you said that, because I thought, but my first job out of college was working for IBM in sales. And when you're in sales, you're trying to sell a product, features, benefits, objections, and all those kinds of things. And there was an older guy, who was always at the top of the number 1, number 2 for sales. And one of the things he told me on a call one day, he was kind of shadowing me. He says, never be afraid to let your personality come through. And sorry about that.
That's okay.
And he said, never be afraid to let that come through. And the other key piece is that build relationships with people. All coming back to what you're talking about. And, from time to time, that keeps coming back to me. And the guy's name was Sid. I said, Sid was on point. This was 20 plus years ago.
Yeah, well, and that's why it's the power of relationships. So much of the work that I do personally, that I do with my firm, is built on relationships. We've had markets where we had very little penetration, if at all, or it had been dormant for years and years and years. And we'd say, oh, we can't get back in there. And I said, I have some good relationships in that market. Let's see what we can do. And now it's thriving. So don't underestimate yourself. I serve on the board of the Children's Cancer Center here in Tampa.
Oh.
And I was meeting with 2 of the younger 20-something staff people yesterday who are tasked with fundraising. And one of them made a comment about, well, I'm only 26 and blah, blah, blah. I said, whoa, no apologies for age. Yeah. You're in your job. You're good at your job. Yeah. But let's go. But let's not do that anymore. We don't want any of that. It's just go, be you. You're here in this job for a reason, and you're excelling for a reason. And so but I wanted to connect with him as a newer board member, and he's looking for role models, right? He's looking for people like, okay, I want to be somebody in their 50s who's doing okay,
Yeah. I want to be Jay in my generation's Jay.
Well, I don't know about that, but I'll take it, but I don't know about that.
Take it. Let's take a quick commercial break and we come right back.
Excellent.
Okay, cool. Okay. All right. You know what? I don't know whether. Give me 1 second.
Do you have an all-star HR team? You may feel your team is already performing at a high level, but let's take a closer look. Would your company's top leaders and employees agree that your HR team are operating at a high level? Are team members able to influence top executives on difficult topics? Are team members' business and strategy focused on the challenges the organization is facing? Does the executive team trust your direct reports as advisors on human capital issues? If you can answer yes to these questions, you have built an outstanding team. If you feel there is room for improvement, Strategy Focused Group can create a custom development program to elevate the quality of your HR team. We use HCI certification programs as well as non-certified HRBP MBA masterclass to give your team a laser focus on the business and strategy. Please email us at info@strategyfocusedgroup.com.
Yeah, you've dropped so many gems. I mean, it's just amazing how, from the things that we've been talking about and coming from a background of social work into leadership global leadership. So let's talk about leadership and its effect on culture. So if we can develop those leaders, and one of the key components, how do we select leaders and the impact it has on culture? Can you kind of connect those two? Because
Sure.
I read a blurb on the book, and it was one of the key topics that you cover.
Yeah, culture's, massively important, and sometimes it's referred to as kind of a secondary issue. We've got operations, we've got to execute on this until the culture's crappy. And then guess what? It's the only topic in town when turnover's high, all that sort of thing. So the notion of culture and selecting leaders, I have a bias that in the selection process, particularly for leaders, the interview should be brutally difficult. Absolutely, it should be a grind. It should be the candidates should leave as if they've really been grilled, and I don't mean in a cruel way, of course, because at the end of the day, who are they talking about all day? Themselves. If they can't do that well, and they can't apply their successes to the scenarios and, pulling out real life examples because, past performance, obviously a predictor of future performance, then I don't want them on the team. They'll be a better fit somewhere else. But so that selection process for me, absolutely grilling. And what I found is some of the times when I'm on, that I might be with another executive if we're interviewing an executive or a high level director person. Sometimes my colleagues, not in my current firm, but in the past, would want to explain everything to such a degree about the job and the pressures and the complex. We run out of time. Like I haven't heard them say anything yet. So I would just just be the bully in the room. And I'd say, that's great background, but let's kind of, I want to hear, and I would ask very challenging questions, how they resolve problems without going to their boss. If you have a peer, a superior, how do you fix it? Like, I want to know about how you fix things, not how you tell somebody to fix it for you. We've been doing that since we were 2 years old. That's called mom, Johnny's looking at me. So I don't want to hear that. So that to me, in terms of selection, is absolutely essential. And obviously having a clear understanding of what they're actually supposed to do, being able to articulate for them in detail, this is the job. Ideally, you do that in advance electronically, so they're just reviewing materials, and it gives them tells the story, if you will. The connection to the culture, for me, two most important roles in any organization are the CEO, and if it's a large enough shop, the HR executive. The other executives all have a role to play, all the leaders have a role to play, but who sets the tone? The CEO is typically the face of the franchise, and the HR leader is supposed to balance the organization's needs and the employees' needs. And so one of the ways I've done that in the past is I established a role called an employee ombudsman, an employee relations experienced person, not a manager. So frontline employee, reported directly to me as the VP of HR. And employees, other than items for collective bargaining, like wages, hours, things like that, any issue could be brought to her, and she had unfettered access to me.
Okay.
And I announced I went through a whole process, and this again, back to politics, socializing this with the executive team. I put it in policy. It wasn't a program, got the sign off, did all my due diligence. And then I announced to our entire large management team, the entire management team for the health system, that I had eliminated chain of command, and that all of their employees had all access anytime to the employee ombudsman and did not need to seek their approval. Well, about a third of them had a heart attack, and they said, well, that's ridiculous. There's no way that we have to follow chain of command. I said, well, that's technically true. Here's the problem. What if the issue is the chain of command? Where does this employee's voice go? It goes into the ether. We're not doing that anymore. And so that was a wildly successful program. One of the things I'm most proud about over the course of my career. we had at that organization, we had a headcount of about 3,500 employees, and she had 50 visits per month to talk about, most of it low tech, some of it pretty complex. And it gave me an opportunity to really clean out a bunch of really effective middle managers and directors that were just treating their employees poorly. And then all of a sudden, HR listens. HR cares about us. HR is paying attention. This person's been a difficult leader for so long, now they're gone. So it had all sorts of benefits, not the least of which the employees got to the support they need.
Well, you send a signal because the employees see that and say, okay, well, maybe now they're listening and I can come and talk to that person. And then all of a sudden, there could be something that comes about as a result of that. Because so many times we listen and nothing ever happens.
That's
or
right.
We send out another survey. The survey says negative, negative, negative. And then we send another survey 6 months later asking for the same information. Well, you did one 6 months ago, but nothing was done from that. Forget about it.
That's right. Yeah, surveys can be a powerful tool. I used an online platform, so everyone was required to input their action plans, and we held every single raise up through that vertical, up to and including the CEO, if there was not an action plan done based on feedback from the survey. So we had, guess what, 100% compliance on action plans because every manager wanted to get paid. Funny how that works, right?
Funny how that works. But you know what? I thought about as you were walking through that, and you said when you presented that to the plus ones or whatever above, no, we can't do that. Do you think that, and here's my thought, I think that the level of leadership and the era they came up in is kind of holding a lot of things back because they said, oh, we need you in the office 5 days a week. Because that's the only way you're going to grow your career. That's the way you grew your career 5 days a week, but I can still do what I'm going to do from here. I read about a company who people were clamoring about wanting more flexibility. And they said, you know what, we can outsource this all the way to India. And this is what they did.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's just so short-sighted, but I agree with you wholeheartedly. I'm not big on generations when we talk about Gen Z and Gen Y and boomers. I think everybody wants to come to work, be respected, and go home at the end of the day. So I don't get too caught up. There's been multiple generations in the workforce since two people had a kid, and then that kid grew up to help on the farm or whatever, right? And ever since then, there's been multiple generations. This is not news. This is not breaking news that there's young people in the workforce. But there is a mindset, I think, around I paid my dues, you have to pay your dues, this is how it works, take one for the team. That post-pandemic, none of that applies. And we see it with a very motivated workforce in the States around employee activism, employee empowerment, meaning they are empowering themselves. And so back to my favorite word, savvy, the savviest organizations, which is really the leaders of those organizations, are saying, you're right. Let's work together and think about a way that works, that helps us hit our numbers and gives you maximum support. Like, that's not a bad thing. Because pretty soon everyone's going to want to work for you because that's the word on the street about you. So if you're willing to think differently and be bold, make some decisions, it's going to work. And when you say to your employees, yes, I want you to have flexibility, what are you doing? You're building a relationship. You're valuing them as a person. You don't have to say, I value you, Ron, right? You can do it in other ways that are sometimes even more impactful, because a lot of execs say things, but they don't really back it up.
It's the talk.
It's the talk. Yeah, I've heard it for years.
They say all the keywords. So I had a client when I first moved here, maybe 6 years ago, and I'm talking with the CEO. He's telling me about what a great leader he is, and the things they're doing inside of the organization, and all of these kind of cool things, which sounds great on paper. But I noticed the HR leader, CHRO, was just doodling. She would not even make eye contact. I knew that there was a problem. And she says, this is the same person who comes in every day and will not even say the first pleasantry of good morning, how's everybody doing this morning? He walks right in his office, takes his jacket off, closes the door. He doesn't come out for bathroom breaks and meetings, and that's it. But he swears out he's got it all on point.
Wow.
Totally clueless.
Clueless, yeah. And will soon be a bad fit because
he eventually had to close the business down because everybody was leaving, as a result.
Wow.
And this was right before COVID and all those kinds of things. So
My
to talk
gosh.
about you, I want to go back to you before we begin the process of closing out. Important influences in your life that have built you into the level of leader, visionary that you are today. Who was important?
Well, that's a loaded question, but it's a great one, right? It's a great question. So the first person that always comes to mind when I think about that is my father. I was blessed to have an amazing relationship with my dad. He was a United Methodist minister, very successful. And I talk that at the very tail end of the book, I talk about the importance of a strong moral compass.
Yeah.
Because if you have that, then the elements in the book are actually going to work. If you don't have a strong moral compass, then you're just loud. And that's not really good for anybody. So he is personally incredibly influential. Professionally, I worked for a CEO who valued HR. She valued her team. She exemplified the importance of relationships. So as I kind of had these natural tendencies, I was seeing this in action. I was the HR VP. She was the CEO, my boss. But when I've thought about both of them, there was an element of kindness that they baked into their leadership style. It wasn't, a tough, hard charger. Like when I hear words like that, I think, is it 1952? Like hard charger? Like, what are you even talking about? Who are you charging over? Like, are you running into something? Like, no. So they demonstrated this element of kindness consistently. And it was like the mother goose and all these goslings following her down the street. People wanted to work in her organization and be part of her team. And they felt like they were on her team if they were a nurse 4 levels removed from her, or if they were the COO reporting directly to her. She was able to create that, but there was this warmth. And this was at an HCA hospital where very high expectations on earnings. It's a for-profit hospital model, very different than traditional not-for-profits. But she was able to create this wonderful culture. And that's really been something that I pull into my own style.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Last question. What's the most important leadership lesson you've learned throughout your career?
That's an easy one. Take the risk. Take the risk.
Okay.
100% of the time. The downside is you stay where you are, which is not down. The role I'm in today that I took when I was I was 52. Okay, 52 years old. The job I am doing today, I have never done in my life. I've done elements of it. I have a tremendous amount of experience that drives my success, but I have not literally said, I did this job from 2007 to 2013, and I'm coming back to it. I built it up over time, these skills and competencies. And so people have said to me, you took what job? You're going to do what? And I said, it's going to be great. And they said, have you done it before? I said, well, not exactly. And they said, who does that? Right? And I said, well, if it doesn't work, I'll get a different job. Like, I'm not going to die. But it's been thrilling. It's been exciting. I work with an incredible group of professionals, and we're all pulling in the same direction, which is unique. And it was a great decision, but it was a risky decision. So as I was finishing the book, I thought, I'm still living this mantra in my 50s. I'm still like this is what it's about for me, these 3 things.
Taking those, when you think about careers, you know, you're taking a left turn, right turn, a U-turn, and you're consistently adjusting. I thought about something today that when GPS first came out and they had Google Maps, it would always come back and say recalculating if you made the wrong turn, recalculating. And basically what you're saying is that, hey, try it, because you can always recalculate and come back on track and recalculate again, whatever.
It's a great way to frame it. And the opposite of that is, because I worked for 5 years leading that healthcare RPO practice, I learned all these new things. I took the risk doing sales and putting myself out there. Well, now I learned things. It opened new doors for me.
Yeah.
So sometimes that recalculating is, oh, I thought this was a 2-lane road. It's actually an 8-lane road. And wow, I have some unique opportunities here. This is pretty cool. So it's a blessing, but it takes a little bit of courage. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
But it's worth it. It's worth it.
We could continue this on and on and on, but thank you so much for taking the time, you know, to make this happen. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate you sharing with the audience of your philosophy of leadership, which I think is extremely powerful. I wanted that book on that flight, but it's cool. I'll get it when I get back. But thank you so much, man. We're going to close that now, so just stay online.
Will do. Ron, thanks so much. It's been a ball. It's been an absolute ball. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Cool.